So for those of you who haven't heard of the Cooperative Fund of the Northeast, the name says it all. We fund cooperatives across the Northeast in New York and New England. And we've been doing this for about 50 years, providing co-op friendly financial products like loans, as well as co-op education like this mini course and one-on-one business coaching and connections. We're a nonprofit community development financial institution. We offer an investment opportunity that promotes socially conscious enterprise. So if you're interested in any of those, be sure to reach out. As I said before, the learning team, we're here in full force. We've got Maggie, who just made that announcement. We've got Carla, our co-op coach, and I'm also joined today by Carolyn, who is our program director and will be co-facilitating this session, the latter options. If any of you guys need co-op coaching, be sure to reach out at coopfund.coop/coaching. We provided hundreds of hours of support at no cost to co-ops and co-op curious entrepreneurs across the Northeast. So we'll be happy to work with you. Today's session is the last of a three-part series, but you'll have one more opportunity for office hours next week, Wednesday, if you'd like to dive into any of this content, whether it was the business model canvas, today's canvas, which will be the ownership canvas, or the co-op design canvas. You can also just join the session if you want to talk, chat, catch up. And we also have the opportunity for one-on-one coaching. Just hit that link, bit.ly/CFNE intro call. And if you are interested in just connecting with us or peers in your particular co-op industry that we might know, feel free to reach out as well. So as was mentioned, today's session on co-op ownership and governance will be recorded. So make sure you are appropriately orchestrated for that recording. It's going to be mostly the screen, but maybe your face might be on there. So feel free to go off camera if you don't want that. All right. I think with that, we can dive in. Okay. So we're going to be here for about 90 minutes today. About 10 minutes have already passed. We're going to be exploring three main topics: co-op ownership, what's going on there, how do we cultivate that? Co-op governance, what do we mean by that? It's a harsh word. We're going to break it down, hopefully make it more approachable for you. And how might governance affect and empower our owners? That's what we're going to be exploring today. So if you've got other questions, be sure to drop it in the chat. Maybe we'll have a minute at the end to explore some of these. But as they come up for you, please drop them in the chat. Maybe our co-op coach can respond to anything that's urgent. Otherwise, we'll try to get to it at the end. All right. So we thought we would start today with a quote and a story similar to last time. The quote is, "The true power of governance lies not only in its ability or not in its ability to restrict, but in its capacity to empower." And so this makes me think of two stories. One, it might be one that you've heard before. It's a really simple story. It's actually based on some research that scientists were doing, behavior. And so these scientists, they captured some fleas. They heard fleas can jump really high, right? They can jump so high, they want to test it. So they put these fleas in a jar, and of course, they're jumping out of the jar. They get a bigger jar, jump out of the jar. One day, they put a lid on the jar, and the fleas are jumping, hitting their head, and some learn, right, that maybe we shouldn't jump so high, and they start jumping lower, just beneath the lid. And they leave that lid on for about 2 weeks, and when they take it off, to their surprise, the fleas are still jumping beneath the lid. This is a metaphor that I'm trying to introduce, obviously, for leadership, for governance structures. Sometimes we set up barriers that limit the ability of our people to lead beyond the lid. And we're thinking of their minds, of their willingness to engage, of their ability to engage. How do we create structures, governance structures, quote unquote, that help people understand with clarity and a sense of direction what their role is, what their limits are, and how do we do something that empowers them? Another study that I've been seeing floating around social media is one where they have these ants that keep harassing insects, unfortunately. But they have these ants on pieces of paper, and what they do is they draw a black marker using a black marker to draw a circle around the ant. And the ant interprets that as a boundary and it can't go beyond it. It just stops and it's insane. And one time they draw the boundary next to the ant leg and the ant realizes it can step over it. And from that moment, the ant can never be trapped again. The second they see that that rule wasn't real, it was just an imposition, they never follow that rule again. So how many of us have been in an organization where people don't seem to be able to try beyond a certain point? Next generation of leaders or managers come in, people still aren't going beyond what we used to do, right? And where do we see there are fake rules all over the organization that no one pays attention to or follows because we already stepped over that line and we're not going to be bounded by that again. So how do we create actual structures that respond to what people are dealing with, that empower them, that help them to realize what's possible? That's what we'll be exploring today. But before we can get into the power of governance to do so, we need to think about who are the governors, the owners of the co-op in this case. So let's talk about ownership. So a great tool to explore this would be the ownership model canvas by Start at Co-op. This tool is a great precursor to your bylaws. When you're thinking about your co-op or your organization, if it's a nonprofit, you might be thinking, what are our bylaws? What is this kind of this Bible of governance rules and codes of conduct and things like that that we have to operate in? And that seems like a fully developed product. But before you can get there, you want to explore some of these questions, right? Number one, what does your project hope to achieve? Why does it exist, right? So we exist too. So what, right? This is some of the thinking we explored in our first session using the co-op design canvas. We have to know what is the purpose of this thing. And we all have to share in that vision of what this purpose will help to bring into being, right? That shared vision. So what does your project hope to achieve? Why does it exist? Next, we're getting into some of the Jews, right? Who are the stakeholders that will be member owners of your co-op, right? And who are the stakeholders who are not going to be owners of your co-op, but are still impacted nonetheless? So whether you work a co-op, we're going to have folks who work in the business be our members, maybe your housing co-op. We're going to have folks who are going to be accessing their residence or creating a home here as members. Maybe it's a consumer co-op or a grocery store or a credit union. The folks who put their money here, who buy from, who consume this good or service, those are your member owner stakeholders. Say you're a worker co-op, who are your non-owner stakeholders? Those will be your customers, your suppliers, the folks who are impacted by your business, who depend on your business, but they may not share in the ownership of the business. So these are really important. And this feeds directly down into guidance, right? Perhaps you've created a flat organization. We're all bosses. We're thinking outside of the boss, actually. We still want to set up a guidance structure. And that might look like a board of directors, right? But in favor of reimagining what's possible and not taking on those structures, you can rename those guys and call them whatever you want, right? Advisors, ambassadors, accountability buddies. Who are the folks who are helping to guide this co-op, right, at a governance and strategy level? So stakeholders feeding into that ecosystem of who helps to guide this thing forward, right? Are customers important? Maybe we should hear from them. Maybe there should be a role for them to help in the guidance, right? Suppliers, same thing. How do we allow folks in our ecosystem to be a part of that guidance structure, whatever it is? So who are our stakeholders? Are they members or not? And what's their role in guidance? That's a good first piece to consider, this L. The second piece would be 3 and 4. And I like to imagine these as scales, right? What are the benefits that people can expect from joining this co-op? What benefits do members get, right? What is that? How heavy is that? And does it counterbalance the responsibilities or set of expectations required for being in this co-op, right? If I'm going to get a certain amount of money for being here, a certain amount of recognition for being here, and a certain amount of access to ownership, that's a lot. That's heavy. That's very powerful. That's compelling. What are the responsibilities that counterbalance that keep this engine balanced and moving forward sustainably. So those are two things, right? What are the benefits that members get? Is it higher pay? Is it votes for this or that? What are the responsibilities that come with that, right? Is there buy-in? Is there an ongoing need for labor in terms of administration or event planning or something else? Then you get over to 6 and 7, which I can see together as well, right? These are the rights. Every business that exists, someone is creating it with the expectation that they have governance rights. Or in other words, they can say what happens. They get to make decisions, key decisions. And they also believe they're going to have financial rights, whether they use this language or not. They're thinking about whether or not they're able to get any income or money from this thing, right? Dividends, right? After it earns a profit, what money do I get access to? How do I get access to that? So they're thinking, I get to say what happens here, make decisions, governance rights. They're thinking about how I economically and financially benefit from this thing, what conditions allow us to extract value, financial value. So those are the rights, governance, and financial. And that leads right into what do we actually need to get this thing started for this year? How are member owners helping us to raise that money, right? So if you've tracked all 3 sessions, we explored the co-op design canvas, which says, what is the problem you're trying to solve at the member perspective level? What is that shared solution we can come together to do? And what are the roles we're going to take on to do it? Then we have the business model canvas, which says, okay, looking at the economic engine of this thing, the way it creates value for its customers, for us as members, and so on, what needs to be done? And then now we're looking at the social engine of this thing. How do we help people become owners and actually take on the role of governance of this thing? So those 2 engines that are going to power that central co-op, the economic engine, the business model canvas, and the governance engine, the ownership model and governance structure. So these are kind of, this is a high level overview. Let us contextualize these questions and text boxes. So we've got a coffee co-op here. Their name is Artisan Coffee Roasters, and they're seeking to craft the highest quality coffee, roasted and brewed in the highest quality working conditions. So great product, great company. They're looking to be that. That's the aspiration. They know why they exist, right? And if we are this, maybe they have a sense of what that creates in the world, right? We're happy and people wake up in the morning and can handle their jobs and things with smiles. So who are the stakeholders? Here, they've listed it as membership is open to our current employees. So folks who currently work in the shop, right? They're a worker-owned coffee company. So that makes a lot of sense. They're going to have founders. They're going to have folks who came on later and became members, and they're going to have future employees who they want to create a pathway to ownership for. So membership is open to current employees. Who are your non-owner stakeholders? These are our customers, our suppliers, farmers, local partners. Maybe we have a relationship with the local college, things like that. Now they're thinking about benefits and expectations. So members benefit by getting a higher salary. They get health insurance, time off, and profit sharing and voting rights. So these are all the things they're going to put on a pamphlet to attract individuals who want to become members of this co-op, folks who currently work for them and therefore are eligible. What does it take to have that benefit? They have this requirement that members are required to have worked 300 hours and they must be endorsed by 2 members. Some folks have a financial buy-in, right? Maybe because it's a worker co-op, there's 5 of us, we're a tight-knit group, it's higher, it's $1,000, it's $10,000, maybe it's lower, $500, $100. Maybe they didn't want to have that at all, so they didn't put it in. Maybe they created a payment plan that auto deducts out of your paycheck, or you pay it over the year. You can create what type of expectations are necessary and appropriate for your co-op. And those 2 things have to balance, right? What if they said you had to work 2 years and be endorsed by all 5 members to get this higher salary and this insurance? That might be a bit too high of a burden to cross, right? So they might be expecting a lot for not that much. Maybe they're giving a lot of benefits. You're going to get the highest salary possible. You're going to get profit sharing, time off, 6 months time off, right? And all you've got to do is pay $5 and say you love coffee. That's not going to work out. It's not going to work out. A lot of people are going to be taking vacations and the business is not going to do well. So you need to find a balance there. Then we've got our governance rights and our financial rights, right? So what can members do, right? Members can run for the board, elect board members, approve the bylaws, vote on issues. The board can, so they've decided to create a board, initially a 3-person board made up of workers, and they want to also have outside people. So they've created a bit of a separation between who can do what already. Members can and the board members can. This is bringing in hierarchy and differentiation into the context of the co-op already. So board members can approve the budget and dividends, right? As opposed to what members can, and review the general manager, right? So now we've got management, members, and board of directors, right? 3 different type of sub-stakeholders within the stakeholders of who are current members owners. So gonna get a little bit more interesting here. We have to really figure out what's the structure that can support the members, the managers, and the board. And then financial rights, right? Patronage distributions. Patronage is a term when you refer to the dividends of a co-op, right? The amount of funds left over after the co-op makes a profit that it redistributes to its members on a patronage basis, which means the more you patronize the business, the more you're entitled to, as opposed to the more you invest into the business. So what are those rights, governance, and financial that you want to establish for owners, and how do they steward those rights, right? The governance of that. And then, of course, they have this investment at the bottom right here, right? Thinking about what's needed to get started. That should feed nicely into the business model. So this is a great precursor for your bylaws. Your bylaws covers a lot of this information. In fact, Start That Co-op has a tool that can help you translate this to that intermediary step between this and your bylaws. Your bylaws will cover all of this as part of your incorporation or your operating agreement, your LLC. And you're going to want to be able to get started and start iterating on what this would be before you commit time to creating a really robust, 15-page, 20-page bylaw document. So this is a great precursor for that for groups who are exploring all of these elements. They get to see it on the same page and have a shared experience building it. It's a great tool for that. It'll be attached as a link when you get these slide decks, or you can go to Start That Co-op and learn from them directly as well. So next, I want to invite up a volunteer. We're going to take about 10 minutes to speed through what some of your biggest questions are for this. We can run through the whole thing, or we can kind of go to places where you're really curious. Do we have a volunteer? Which one of you wants to explore this in front of an audience of your peers? I know.
Oh my.
All right, let's do it. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing all right. I'm doing all right. I'm enjoying, I love the sunshine and all of that, but I've got a nice fan, so I think I can handle it. I assume you're experiencing some type of heat over there.
Yes, it's nice and hot.
It's hot. Excellent. So let's dive in. Tell us about your co-op. What is its purpose before we move forward?
Okay. Well, our co-op is called Tehuti Ma'at, and its purpose is to develop cooperative institutions in the areas of healing, art, and education that are specifically for the empowerment and upliftment economically, politically, and culturally of people of African descent. So we have like several cooperative ventures and a vision of many more cooperative ventures. Does that feel complete?
Fantastic. Uplifting the people in every way possible, it seems, creating co-ops and many more. All right. So who are your stakeholders?
So our stakeholders would be our members. I think from the last session, I was able to gather from Carolyn that we have more of like a hybrid, I think when we did the breakout. So it's like worker owned, but then there's also people who we're servicing who are not members as well. So that's something that we're just now creating some distinction around. And that was actually the area where I felt like we needed more support around.
Okay.
But I would say the owners, so like just as an example, one of our ventures is our initiative or program called Organic Food for the People. And right now we have a garden base in Brooklyn, New York called Tehuti Community Garden. So the garden members are stakeholders, but also the people in the neighborhood, right? The community that we're building in that particular neighborhood and beyond, who are attracted to the garden are also stakeholders. We also have like, I don't know if would you consider like Green Thumb, the City Parks Department, a stakeholder? Yeah.
Absolutely.
So that's
Stakeholders, anybody, a good way to think about stakeholders, anybody who could either support you or get in your way.
okay. All right, that's
Yes.
a great way to look at support you or get in your way. So, okay, so there's that. I just want to kind of breeze through at least a few different areas of the organization, even though we don't have to get into all of them, just to kind of get started around viewing it. So for example, Coins and Caris, which is our spiritual marketplace where we offer goods and services. So we have the people who come onto the website would be like anyone exposed to our shop would be stakeholders, right?
Yep.
And yeah, the vendors that create the goods and services, or the farmers that we acquire the herbs or different things from, any producers, like if we're purchasing bottles and things like that. So I guess manufacturers and artisans.
Excellent.
I'd like to use one other area, maybe our online school, so Tehuti Academy. So would like Teachable be considered like a stakeholder because we're using their service, or?
Well, it depends on how much you interact with Teachable, but let's call it a tool.
Okay.
And you're gonna interact with the online students who are definitely stakeholders. Perhaps you have teachers or facilitators or whatever the case is that you're actively interacting with. They have a stake in this thing.
Yeah, and I would say like any participants in our workshops and classes. Yeah, because we typically do a lot of like live programming and then, yeah, make that evergreen by putting it online.
Okay, let's spend a minute or a couple seconds on the members again. Tell me more about members.
Okay, so members, we have our, I guess, governance model is a little multi-layered because we have different ranks. So we have more of a military or like militant structure to the governance. So we consider ourselves to be like, our member program is called the Tehuti Militia, and we have different ranks within the militia. So each of those ranks have different benefits and responsibilities, or just like access, I guess. Still something that we're distinguishing more clearly. But we also have like on the governance side, those would be considered ranks as well. Like if someone is on the Council of Elders or the Board of Directors or Board of Trustees or Youth Council, those are each ranks also. We consider those to be ranks because someone could be in those ranks and not necessarily be like on the ground, you know, facilitating programs and actively, yeah, I guess operating within the instrument.
Okay, all right, very interesting. Love to hear more. So we've got members who are part of a militia framework, different ranks, and that translates, I just put them down here, into some guidance structures we've set up: Council of Elders, Youth Council, Board of Directors. So this is great. Ideally, we want to link our stakeholders to these guidance structures, right? We want to consider the ecosystem of stakeholders who are involved, exchanging value, interacting. What voice do they have in guidance, right? They may not be owners, so they aren't going to control necessarily the internal dynamics of the organization, but maybe they should have a say, or you should be at least able to hear their voice as it pertains to how these things might affect them. So customers, especially participants and things like that. So that's pretty good.
Okay,
Now,
can I add another
ahead.
that has recently been coming up in our sessions is specifically holding and making sure that we make a specific space for investors and people who are just going to like fund and support the work that we're doing as like its own lane.
Gotcha. And so it can go either way with this, right? Not necessarily a right or wrong answer, but are you seeing them as member owners with certain abilities and limitations, or are you seeing them as non-member owners?
Well, we want to have both. So a member owner could be an investor and support in that sense, but we're trying to create a separate lane for those who don't necessarily want to be involved in the organization, or maybe they don't fully align with our criteria and they still want to support what we're doing.
Gotcha. All right, excellent. Any other thoughts here or questions on kind of 2.5?
No, I mean, I like that it says like how many board seats go to each stakeholder. I mean, those are things we haven't figured out, but
Exactly.
if you think it's important to have that like be very structured and linear in that way, or like, do you recommend that, or is it fine to have it more open?
I think it depends, because sometimes if it's a board of directors, for example, they are making decisions that would affect everybody. And some people might be more affected than others. Some people might have no representation. And so you would want to think, what's the appropriate amount of visibility and voice do you want to give to the various stakeholders? You might be in a situation where you create a farmer's market. This is a pretty simple, good example. And you have members who are going to buy the food and members who are going to sell the food, right? And so now you have a lot of ability to affect things as a decision maker, right? Do I make decisions so that it's cheaper to buy the food, make it more favorable for the consumers, or do I make decisions that are more favorable for the producers, right? Give them as much as possible for their food that they're selling, right? And that could create a conflict of interest between those two different groups. So maybe you want to have enough on both sides to have the proper conversation to reflect the flow of vendors, the flow of consumers. You might want to have that, or you're going to have to engage skillfully with elevating their interest to a much more unifying mission. How do we make sure we have food in the community? This is the price point this has to be at for folks to afford it and for our vendors to be whole, and I'll make all decisions around that, but still invite those stakeholders into the conversation, right? So you're going to have to kind of do all three. Think about who is really impacted most by this, right? We want their voice there. Who's also important here? We can't make it happen without them. So we need to think about, is it 3 consumers, 2 vendors, right? Or more than that? And how do we help them to transcend their narrow interests in the context, right? So those 3 tasks are definitely gonna have to be done. And you can decide how to best do it.
Thank you.
So as you're thinking about all these different types of members, you're going to want to create benefits for each of them, right? So you're going to want to think about militia members, might be misspelling that wrong. What are the benefits for those guys, and our sustainer or investor members, right? So
I like the word.
Yeah. So what do you have in mind so far?
Okay. Sorry, I'm just taking note. Okay, so so far we have, all right, so for the kingdom rank, we pretty much have like a cascade from like kind of like the general, what we would consider like the general body, and being open to anyone. Like, for example, if anyone is in the network of organic food for the people, even if it's like I'm starting a garden also in Boston, so there's going to be a crew that's going to be handling that garden, for example. So all of those members of that particular garden would also be like part of the Kingdom Ring. So it's more like general body, getting access to like, you know, informing the instrument through like our annual meeting. And then as it cascades and we go into like, for example, the Empire Rank, we have seasonal meetings. So the Kingdom Rank members may not have access to the seasonal sessions that we have, which are giving more like, I guess, intimate direction to the direction that the instrument is going in. And the Empire Rank is more so for people who are more invested in like going through a deeper like educational process with us, like, you know, ideological development, you know, working through curriculum, want to become facilitators, want to go through training. And then the top rank right now is the Galaxy rank, which are for the people who are actually like builders. They have access to contribute to the cooperative business ventures in, for example, with Tehutima Academy, just as an example. Someone in the Empire rank is going to have access to all the classes and courses and information on there, but someone in the Galaxy rank actually can upload their own course and be generating revenue from whatever course or program they're selling at Tehutima or through Tehutima Academy. So yeah, so the benefit of being a Galaxy rank member is you actually get access to the governing side of the instrument. So we want anyone who is, for example, on the board of directors or anything like that, for them to have come through our initiation process that is required for the Galaxy rank, which right now is more like an invitation based. Empire rank is like application based, and then Kingdom rank is open.
Gotcha. Okay, so that's a great place to stop, and you'll have to develop more of this for the investors as well, right? What benefits do they get? And similarly, what are the responsibilities of these folks, right? So for Kingdom Rank, what are they expected to do? I know it's an open application or open invitation, but what is it that they have to do from the beginning to the end of their journey? What are those responsibilities, whether that's a buy-in, annual fee, or quarterly meetings? How do they retire? You know, kind of, we don't have to go into all of them now, but that's the challenge. That's what we're trying to do, and we're trying to balance them. So what are some responsibilities for Kingdom Ranks before we move on?
Okay, so for example, people who are members of the garden have to contribute $22 a month in dues. So those are membership dues. We have a program, like an energy exchange program. It's a whole nother thing. I don't know where that would fit in to this, but yeah, so that's one responsibility. Second responsibility, it depends on what program or what lane, I guess, they come in at. But for example, if someone's a member of the garden has specific bylaws and requirements for members. So they would need to volunteer on a regular basis. So that could be like 4 times a month. We have, again, if someone's not able to do that, there are other things that we have outlined that they can do. But in general, there's some degree of participation requirement in at least one of our areas of focus or one branch of the instrument. So as I said, that's healing, art, and education. So yeah, it would be their participation.
Excellent, excellent. And do you have specific questions or tensions arising for you guys as you're trying to figure out these 2 pieces in particular? What do we ask of our members, and what do we give them?
I think in the past, one of the issues that we've had has been maybe on the higher ranks, but just we've tried to be really accommodating with energy exchanges and not necessarily requiring financial contribution. So we've shifted that because of like probably like the first 7 years of trying to do that, and then recognizing, what the dynamics were, and the fact that like our money wounds and a lot of the issues that were coming up around the finances and it just being imbalanced, whether that's someone coming in feeling like entitled to more because of their energy exchange, or just some type of imbalance, because it's not directly, okay, you pay this, you get that. So we've had more issues around like the energy exchange piece, which I think is an important element of how we operate, because it's mostly non-conventional in that way. It would be great if it could just be straightforward, but I think, that's been one of the main issues that we've had as far as responsibilities are concerned. Like either someone feels like they are giving more than they're receiving. So like, I guess also acknowledging our intangibles. So that's one of the things that we're covering right now is like, we offer a lot that really can't be quantified. Like when it comes to like healing and this like deep spiritual, like transformative experience, it's not as easy to quantify that for people who are contributing.
Yeah, that's a big issue. Folks trying to respond to that. I'm hearing you guys have kind of switched how you've done that. What have you guys done? And then maybe it might be interesting to hear other folks do before I give any feedback. What have you guys done that has worked to move that forward?
Well, we've been working together this season actually as a cooperative to really be clear about what those intangibles are and actually having them acknowledged in agreement form, like literally just having it written in black and white so that that's clear. Also, we developed a program, like a system for our energy exchange program, where now each person has a file, even if they're not doing even if they're doing a monetary energy exchange, we still create an energy exchange file. And then we go through like a few different systems, like kind of like a ritual process to determine, what is going to be the appropriate energy exchange season by season. So we also added that. We implemented doing it on a seasonal basis instead of like, okay, you just come in and we have this infinite potential of what can happen. We're coming in and we're looking at each season, and the commitment for each member is on a seasonal basis. And what we want to do is with the higher ranks, or with people who would be, for example, on the board of directors on the governing side, those would be more long-term commitments. But for the membership, it's on a seasonal basis. So just taking it more short-term, and then having, like I said, a file for each person where we can go over, what are the things that are coming up? What are the deliverables? We came up with a three pieces to our system. So there's the investment piece, which is the actual financial contribution. So now we require, even if you can only contribute $5, whatever it is, whatever you can comfortably contribute financially is still a requirement. And then there's the deliverable, which is like, what are you giving and what are you getting? So that's actually outlined. And then the third piece is the actual presence. Like what can they be held accountable to? What are they committing to show up for? Are they showing up for our monthly healing ciphers? Are they showing up for our accountability community sessions? So that way we know specifically like what presence they're going to have in the instrument.
Fantastic. Okay, you guys making it through. Love that. So, this could be a contentious issue. Some folks would say, we're not doing buy-ins. We want it to be an open thing. We're not going to follow the existing system. You got to pay to play. And then they run into issues around that, because sometimes when folks don't buy in, they aren't bought in just because of their prior conditioning, right? And it's easier to complain than to contribute, right? Especially if there was a dollar figure attached to that. It might also be the case that people are conditioned to be quiet if they haven't contributed anything, right? Money talks. And so you don't want that, right? You don't want the folks who feel like they've paid and it's black and white, I can run my mouth all day, and the folks who haven't feel like they're not empowered to participate. And then it could even be difficult to quantify what the value of that is if, for example, when they leave, they're entitled to some type of distribution, right? And that came from all of the inputs in the organization, from buy-ins to how productive they were, if they're entitled to any type of payouts. How do you quantify that if some people are giving some of that? This might be hard. So there's a lot of issues around that, and there's no right or wrong answer. It's really thinking about how do we get everyone to understand the issues and come into a sense of ownership of them so we can steward those decisions together. So I'll leave that piece at that. Oh, Carolyn, get in there.
Second. One of the things that I see, particularly with multi-stakeholder co-ops, is what are the things that we need to attach to membership and like our member share for core co-op members? And what are things that we can do in a different way through a loyalty program, through a subscription fee, those types of things. And so just to kind of highlight that best practice is sort of set one member share price for everybody, one per each class of members, and keep in mind making it accessible for the people with the least financial resources. And then if you have additional financial needs, see how you can do that through a subscription program, through admissions to classes, through member loans that don't entitle them to an additional, that voice part that Johan was getting, the money talks part, doesn't entitle them to an additional voting stake. It just lets them use their financial resources to support the co-op. So I just wanted to highlight that as a way that you can adhere to the equal membership requirements for everybody and still make it work for people at different financial levels and the co-op's financial need.
Love that. Thank you for that, Carolyn. You can put that responsibility at different points of the journeys and have it configured in different ways, right? It doesn't have to be all here and everyone has to wrestle with it, right? It could actually come alive at the points of interaction. And you guys are moving in that direction, so love that. So maybe the last thing I'll do before we move on to governance and how that comes fully alive after ownership, give you a chance to talk about any approaches you're taking on with governance and financial rights and any questions you have there. So we'll push a little bit.
Through which processes and by which stakeholders. Okay, so yeah, that's something that we're also designing out at the moment. Previously in other sessions I've described, but just for anyone who's watching who's not familiar, we've been actively functioning for the last decade, but we are just now putting these systems in place. So we're kind of designing things based off of what has already happened, which has some benefits to it. I gotta plug this in. So how have our decisions been made? So we mainly make decisions by consensus, but we have, it's kind of like a loose system. It's not specific, but essentially we would have to determine if a decision that's being made is going to affect the entire trajectory of the instrument. Then that decision would be made by consensus. And that's a decision that we make that's slow, and yeah, we just want to make sure that the efficacy is the most, is the priority. And then when we are making decisions where the efficiency needs to be the priority, those might be things that don't necessarily affect the full trajectory of the instrument. It could be, I don't know, for the garden, it could be something like what is going in each of the beds. That could be something that is decided by vote if people are not in full agreement. But if it was a decision that was going to affect the entire scope of the garden, then it would have to be a consensus made decision. For example, like who are going to be in positions of leadership as committee coordinators. That would be consensus. If someone doesn't agree with someone being appointed at a certain position, then we wouldn't move forward with that until we're all in agreement.
Sure. Any thoughts on the investors?
For investors, that's still theoretical piece. So I don't know. I mean, I feel like I could imagine, or I can say that, like, I don't know, people in my family who have invested in different ways could be considered investors that I could look at. But like I said, because we are not designing something out in theory, we're kind of trying to observe what has happened before we put a system in place for it. I actually don't have or feel comfortable saying what it could be for investors, but I'm also open to ideas around that.
Excellent. So the one thing I'll share in that regard is something that's pretty typical. You know, as we know, capital is coercive. So folks who are used to giving money are used to having a sense of control. In co-ops, it's one member, one vote, right? No matter how much you've invested, that could be a separate deal. You pay to buy in, you get a share, you get a vote. And so when folks open it up to an investor class, they might give a non-voting membership. So they'll offer a membership so that you can be a part of the co-op because you believe in this and there's certain access. You know, there's certain benefits and responsibilities that'll come with that, but voting might not be one of them. And so that's something co-ops do to maintain their autonomy in lieu of facing capital needs. And they do other things too, right? Like member loans, so you get capital directly from your people. But if you want to accept outside money, that's a big thing that happens, you know, and it's not easy to face your investors and say, no votes. But you have it written down, they know what they're getting into before they get in there. So, you know, I'll invite Karen and anyone else who dealt with this to share things they've seen before we move on.
No, I think you said it. That's a great distinction that, you know, we have to know who our investors are not. And if somebody wants investment, but they also want control coming with that, and they don't want to take on all the other responsibilities of membership, maybe they're not your investor. Find somebody who's better aligned, and also, you know, give the opportunity to earn dividends to your members to the extent that they're up for it, because that's kind of a win-win.
Excellent. So I'll leave that there just because you're considering that. And we'll close out before moving on to the last piece on financial rights. Any questions or thoughts about this? How do you guys currently determine how you're going to distribute any dividends or surplus profits or patronage if it was an option for you?
So that's something. So this is our first. Well, this is the moment where we're opening ourselves up to operating from a place of abundance and attracting funds and what we need. We've kind of just literally been operating with like exactly enough, and it's been uncomfortable but easy in a sense. So now we've been exploring this, and some of the issues or thoughts that have come up that are important to members are things like determining with the investment of their membership, like when they leave, what benefits they would continue to receive. Say, for example, they invested 10 years as a member and then decided not to be a member anymore. Like, that's just one thing that's come up that we want to figure out. But in terms of someone as an actual member, we were thinking initially our model has been equal distribution for the member owners. And that's something that's also been lifted into question in this season also. Like, is it, you know, is that equitable? You know, should there be some distinctions made between the different members? We do have some, like, I think it would be good to just like express it in detail with like specific ventures. Like, for example, with Tehuti Academy, there's a percentage, currently 11% goes to the operational budget for Tehuti Ma'at, and then the rest of the profit is distributed between whoever created the course, for example. So if it was one person, then they would get the rest of that. If it were someone else, or like a group of people came together to put together a course, then they would evenly split or determine amongst themselves what that split would be, aside from the portion that goes back into the instrument.
Gotcha.
With the garden, just as another example, most of the people everyone at the garden right now are volunteers. We'd love to have be at the point where we could actually, like, you know, have some salary positions, you know, maybe a garden manager, things like that. But right now everyone's a volunteer. Everyone's doing the $22. And our vision around creating some sustainability around that was to allow garden members to produce whatever they wanted from the things in the garden and take those things to market. Those things could go literally into our venture that I mentioned earlier, Coins and Kari. So if, for example, if Isis is at the garden and she's making mugwort bundles, those bundles could be placed on the online shop and sold. And that would be all the profit of that would go to ISIS, for example. So yeah, so that the model we've been using right now has been like a percentage going into Tehuti Ma'at, and then yeah, having the rest of the profit go to whoever put their energy into producing whatever it is.
Gotcha. So yeah, I think all of these are valid and probably suit your needs. That question around is equal, equitable? Great question, right? As I mentioned, co-ops have a special way to distribute their profits, and it's based on how well you've patronized it. So in a worker co-op or coffee shop, for example, they may have a method of, okay, we made an extra $50,000 this year. There's 5 of us. Maybe all 5 of us get $10,000. That's equal. Or Tom put in 40-hour weeks this week, while most of us put in 30-hour weeks this week, right? So 25% more. So as we distribute profits, we have an internal accounting for every hour, $1 or a percentage. And now Tom is getting 15% to our 10% or 35% to our 20%, random numbers. But that lets us see how well he's patronized the business, and therefore what portion of the dividends he might be able to be allocated. So that's one way, which you guys might be familiar, and that has a specific tax treatment by the government, which comes with a tax benefit. But even if you didn't do that, you can organize your business that way, right? Even if you didn't comply with IRS regulations to take advantage of that tax benefit, which is a special benefit for co-ops, you can still organize the way you distribute profits equitably or along the patronage lines rather than equally, right? Not necessarily wrong. One, you do get to take advantage of the government stuff. And the other one is just thinking about the character of cooperation. How do we really want to steward and make decisions around the resources that are surplus for us? So I'll leave it at that because we're going to touch a lot of these. A lot of important points came up here, right? Different membership classes. How do you reconcile that? How do you deal with the fact that we have members, managers, and directors? You guys seem to have a great list of guidance structures down here. Youth Council, Council of Elders, I love that, and the Board of Directors. So you've covered a lot of really good stuff. I want to thank you for being vulnerable and sharing this. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. So before I pass on to Carolyn, I just want to reinforce, now that we have a sense of our ownership structure, why are we doing this governance thing again? Governance sounds like such a gross word, right? It's imposing, it's on top. It's not the funnest word, right? None of us like the government. So especially when you're coming from, as you were just saying with Tehuti Ma'at, and a lot of us are structurelessness, right? We're in community, we're building, things are free flowing and emergent. Why would we want to empower ourselves by including governance through hierarchy, right? Well, hierarchy doesn't go away when you shift from community to organization. It just gets fluid, right? You get to have it located in areas where people who are doing the work get to make more of the decisions, right? So it flows. It might be within the youth at this point around decisions that affect them. It might be with the elders that affect certain things. How do you allow hierarchy to get where it needs to go, right? It becomes fluid. It doesn't just disappear. And if it's properly recognized and organized, it can empower us. If it exists informally, implicitly rather than explicitly, it's going to create limitations. Next, structurelessness, right? We're a community of people, we're a family. How do we become an organization with roles and resource flows, right? How does this and governance in the sense of creating structure empower us, right? Well, power is often limited to those who know the rules. When you have structurelessness, There is an implicit, unspoken, ongoing sense of how things get done. If you ever walked into a meeting and you're like trying to say things and nothing's moving forward, and then someone says things in a certain way, and then everyone gets to vote, you didn't know those rules. You're like, what's happening here? Right? Structurelessness only creates power for those who know the rules, those who are in the in circle. And that's always happening. That's a very old way of human beings getting into each other's business. Lastly, concentrating power. We don't want to concentrate power in this new world. So how do we deal with that? Well, people defer power to folks who seem to have power. How do you help people who feel like they're not the powerful ones? They didn't contribute financially. They didn't do this. They didn't do that. They don't have that expertise. How do you help them to take ownership of power and help those who have power to share it, right? Because people will continue to defer and default to those who seem powerful. So I think there's a lot of value in bringing structure to community as we transition our tasks from being a community to being an organization. And Carolyn will take us further with this.
Thanks, Johan. So what is governance? Johan just pointed it out. You don't have to be scared by it. It doesn't necessarily mean power over. It's just taking what's implicit and making it explicit, what's happening informally through relationships between individuals and systems to something that can actually be sustained and self-replicating. So governance is a system of rules, practices, policies that guide how a co-op is run. It's about big picture. So I loved the example just now of, well, the big picture things, the things that impact the co-op or the organization over the long term, we make by consensus. And that's a great distinction of sort of, those are the governance decisions. It's big picture, it affects our survival, it affects our sustainability, versus what are we going to plant in the garden? It's a short-term decision. It'll impact for at most one growing season. We can take a vote on it. Things that affect the co-op's future, and in particular, governance helps to really ensure the democratic nature of co-ops because it puts in place structures for decision-making that make sure that whoever's taking on that responsibility for governance is really being accountable to all of the members and their needs and their interests, because governance is really about making sure members have a voice, making sure that their interests are being upheld and taken into account. Who can think of other examples of governance decisions before we move on? Might be from your co-op, might be from community organization you're part of, a congregation, your family.
I can say one.
Yeah.
Approving a budget, for example,
Totally.
or management oversight. Those are a couple of things that we do.
Yep. Yeah. So your management's the ones who are going to pick up the reins and do the day-to-day implementation of what the board decides. And that budget, you're going to live with it for at least the year, and it's going to set you up for success or failure moving forward. So that's absolutely something the board wants to get eyes on and approve. Yeah, so let's move on. So what's the role of governance in a co-op in particular, as opposed to a nonprofit or other organization? The first piece is ownership. So, co-op's kind of a three-legged stool resting on three tiers. The first is ownership, and that ownership is equitable, and it includes, shared membership and shared participation. I'm going to say ownership and membership interchangeably because in a co-op, they're both the same thing. Next is governance. And that's what ensures that those member owners are able to participate democratically, have their voices heard along this principle of one member, one share, one vote. And then last is participatory and accountable management. And when I say management, you don't have to think of like the GM or the boss. Management really can mean any structure or system that you're using to make sure that your daily operations are effective and that you're putting in place you're implementing on the strategy that your board developed. So management's accountable to the board in a co-op, and they might hire one general manager, they might hire a team that's like a management team with representation from different functional areas. They might decide all members have management responsibility and they're going to use sociocracy or collective self-management. So, throughout this, when we're talking about management, think about a system versus a person. And this is just sort of an example of how that cycle of accountability works in a worker co-op. So you have your members, your worker owners. Thanks, Ruth. They elect your board, and some of them sit on the board. The board then elects or chooses, hires management, and management manages and directs the employees, some of whom are worker owners. And then, so that's sort of the selecting, and then the accountability works in the opposite direction. So the workers are accountable to management, including worker owners. When they're wearing their just employee hat or worker hat, they're accountable to their manager if they have one, or to the collective of each other as managers. Management is accountable to the board. We want to say, we have these goals. Are you guys living up to it or not? Are you making sure that we're having a safe workplace? We're meeting our metrics, whatever. And then the board's accountable to all of the worker owners who elected them. So worker owners say, we need better wages, or we need a safe workplace. Board set policies to make sure that that happens for us. That's part of our mission and our values. And just to say, I know there are folks here from food co-ops and other types of co-ops. So even though this is worker focused in terms of the words that it's using, it's the same thing happens. You have consumer members, they elect a board, the board hires management. It usually literally is a GM in a food co-op, but the functions are the same. So digging in a little bit more, something that we see happen a lot, really in all co-ops, but especially in small co-ops where everybody wears both hats. If you have 5 people, 10 people, you might not have an elected board. You might make a bunch of decisions in a meeting and not really be thinking, am I wearing my worker hat or my owner manager hat or owner governance hat? So this table is just to kind of tease out, again, governance is about big picture goals, high level policies, long-term planning. Fiduciary duty, which is a legal term that means really looking out for the financial, legal, and ethical risks of the co-op. And then really setting culture for the co-op and providing big picture guidance and checking to make sure that management's delivering on the goals that the board and the members have set forth. Management's the implementation side. So it's really making sure day to day, the stuff that the board and the members want is getting put into practice, that it's efficient and effective, that there are shorter term goals. So, take those long-term 1, 3, 5-year goals of the board and lay that out into what are our monthly and weekly work plans. And also advising the board. So Chris gave the example of the budget, and management often is going to kind of propose because they're in there in the QuickBooks all the time. But the board ultimately takes responsibility for approving the budget. So there's a lot of sort of collaboration, ideally, between management and governance. So being a worker owner, being a member owner gives you a right to participate in certain ways in governance and to make sure that your needs are heard and the co-op is responding to your input. Who can say some things that being a worker owner or a member owner does not guarantee in a co-op? Feel free to just come off mute and say it.
Maybe it doesn't guarantee that you'll get paid.
It might not guarantee that you'll get paid, depending. I mean, you hope that your management is taking care of that. And if you have a contractual relationship with the co-op, then it should mean you're going to get paid. But yeah, there's no guarantee that you're going to get a patronage dividend, for instance. The dividend is a direct result of all of the co-op members doing their part. And so if that doesn't happen effectively, there might not be any profit left to share, any surplus left to share at the end, for sure.
It doesn't guarantee your right to your job, I guess, or your core job responsibilities are separate from being a member, right? Is what I'm thinking.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, it doesn't guarantee you a job. It doesn't guarantee you freedom from consequences if you have poor performance. Your thing that you were hired for is separate from your responsibilities as an owner. What else? Doesn't guarantee you the right to participate in every decision. All of the co-op members don't have to vote on what's going in the garden or what type of toilet paper we're buying. And the last one that we like to mention is it doesn't necessarily give you a right to sensitive information outside what you need for your job role. So some co-ops may decide we're going to have like complete and total wage transparency, but there are certain things that probably you don't want to share just for cohesion reasons, and there are a handful of things that you're actually like legally not allowed to share for legal reasons. Yeah, so just to drill down on this a little bit, as a member, you don't have unlimited rights, but you do have rights, and your participation is critical to the co-op's survival and being the best co-op that it can be. So governance really is about making sure that the members' needs and aspirations get turned into a concrete strategy and set of goals by the board, and then put into practice by management. I don't think we have to say a whole lot about this. I kind of have gone over it, but just to like drill down on that, having a governance structure is actually, I think sometimes we feel like, ooh, hierarchy is bad because it means oppression. Sometimes hierarchy is actually the way that we make sure that leaders are serving the people who allow them to be leaders. And so it's a way of sort of flipping the script that being a leader in a co-op, being elected to the board, being chosen by your board to be on the management team is a huge responsibility, and you're actually serving the members. So yeah, members can participate in governance by voting and serving on the board, providing input. The board and management should ask them for input. You should have structures for that so that you're creating those feedback loops. And in turn, they have a responsibility to stay informed. So if there's a monthly meeting where the co-op's financials are shared, or if you're part of a trade organization where you get like a monthly industry e-blast, you might want to know what's going on so that you can help when your input is needed, make the best decisions that you can. And members do have a direct vote in certain things that could affect the long-term survival of the co-op. So that's something that usually gets defined in your bylaws to some extent. But things like changing a location, selling, demutualizing, that type of stuff. And I guess the other thing I'll say is like the flip side of that is the co-op has responsibility to educate members and keep them informed so that they can participate fully. Several of you, when you registered, talked about decision-making structures and who gets involved in which decision. I'm not going to go too deeply into this, but I will paste a couple of things in the chat if you want the deep dive. But basically, when you're thinking about who decides, do we need to all be involved or a smaller group, who has the information that's needed, who's going to be impacted by the outcome, because you want for them to have at least an opportunity to provide input, if not actually be a decision maker. How quickly do you need to decide? It was already mentioned, consensus takes a long time, but it creates a more durable decision. Do you need broad support to succeed? If you make the decision on your own, are people going to get really mad? Or is it like, yes, buy that toilet paper? Yeah, Chris. You're on mute. Chris, you're on mute.
So sorry.
Yeah.
I just have a question. Sorry to interrupt. And I got a question
Please.
about decision-making versus ratification. And
Mhm.
when ratification isn't decision-making, really. It's hard to divide the
Yeah.
two in my mind, because at some point it's like the people who ratify get to make the decision in a way. I don't know if there's any clarity here about that. That would be great.
There is not, because that is a very fine distinction. Off the cuff, I'm going to say, so the ratifiers are ultimately the one who are accountable for the impact of the decision. So if they make the wrong call, they are the ones holding the bag. It is their responsibility to create a decision-making process that creates the best proposal for them to ratify. So if you have a bunch of frontline worker owners on your board that don't have a lot of visibility into day-to-day operations, finance, what your sales projections look for, they shouldn't be making the budget. They're going to approve it, but they're going to ask people who do have that information to put together the best budget they can, explain it to them, justify it, and then say, yeah, we feel comfortable with that, or no, we understand that the numbers balance at the bottom, but it doesn't align with one of our core values in a certain way or whatever. So a lot of the times that's the ratifier's role, is to look, again, bigger picture, not just do the numbers balance, but is it in accordance with our long-term strategy and our values, and is it humane and stuff like that? And then to go back to the drawing board. But as much as they can, make sure that the person bringing the proposal has those parameters up front, say like, we definitely have to give a cost of living increase. Y'all come up with the budget, but it has to improve cost of living increase. That's your parameters, for instance. Helpful? Okay, cool. Yeah, so let's keep on going. At the end of the day, there are only 3 ways to decide. Simple decisions that don't have a lot of impact on others, I can decide. And if you think about it in your family, when I go to the grocery store, I can decide which kimchi I'm going to buy. It will be okay. If somebody doesn't like it, I'll get a different one next time. You can decide. So, this is delegation. So the board could say to managers, I'm delegating authority to you to decide who to promote from the, to a supervisor, for instance, because you have the right information and I trust you. Or we could decide if it's, a more complex decision, or there are a lot of stakeholders. So we decide is obviously where the rubber hits the road here. The other ones are pretty straightforward. But there are a bunch of different things this can look like. So in the US, we're pretty comfortable with, we know what simple majority looks like. We know what supermajority looks like. We have that in our legislative process. It's fast, but there are winners and losers, and it ends up being contentious. And, if it's an important decision where people are going to be negatively impacted in a really bad way, might want to think about a different thing to do. Robert's Rules of Order is something that if you have bylaws that were created by a lawyer, it might say this is how you're going to make decisions. Again, this is when Johan was talking about structures that support the people who are in the know. Robert's Rules is definitely one of those. So it's very procedural, and it favors people who know how to use that system. But a lot of the times it's in those boilerplate, governance documents that you might get. Fist of 5 voting, it still has a voting element in that, so it's like anything from hold up a hand, anything from a fist, 1 to, 1 and over is a yes. So it's really, it's related to, it's like a mid-ground between voting and consensus, but it lets you say, I am very tepid, I will go along with this, but I don't love it, to yes, 5, this is the best decision I've ever heard, let's do it, I'll lead it. And it can be really good for groups learning how to do consensus because it lets you take the temperature of the group and say, okay, let's hear from the ones and twos. What would make this proposal better? What would move you up to a 3 or a 4 or a 5? And if we do this and we bring it forward, y'all who are 4s and 5s, you're going to have to really carry your weight. If you feel so strongly about it, you need to get out front and lead. Consensus, I think we all think we know what consensus is, but in practice, it takes good facilitation. It takes training for the people practicing it. It's slower, but it makes sure that marginalized voices are lifted up and that in the end you end up with a win-win solution that works for everybody. And then there are a couple of modifications to consensus. There's, consensus -1 or consensus with a supermajority backup or integrative consent, where you work toward what's a sort of minimally viable product that we can all live with. So that was a lot of detail and also maybe not as much as some of you were looking for. So I'm going to put 2 resources in the chat. Guide to Consensus, and then In It Together is just a really good thing for like organizational behavior and learning how to work together and have the type of trust and communication that you need to have good consensus decision making. Let's see. Who decides? Okay, so there are 2 tests that we use for in a co-op. Do the managers decide or the board? One is the extensiveness. Yes, there will be, I know I'm going fast, there will be a follow-up email with this presentation. So extensiveness test is, this is a decision the board needs to make because it impacts a large number of co-op members, commits a lot of the co-op's resources, or is going to impact us for a long time. And then the next one is the significance test, which is this a decision the board can make, or do all members, is it such a major decision that everybody needs to be involved? So does it affect the likely survival of the co-op? Like, are we going to sell out? Does it have to do with policies for hiring or terminating co-op members? Because, if you terminate a co-op member as an employee, they also stop becoming a member. So that impacts your membership. And does it affect the basic character of the cooperative? So, if you are I'm trying to think of a ridiculous example. If you're a cafe and you decide you're going to become a building supply company, has a really different vision and would impact you in all kinds of ways. So you'd want members to be involved in that. Again, because I know I'm going fast on this part, a couple of resources in the chat. US Federation of Worker Co-ops has these mini guides. They have a couple of them on governance in particular and kind of setting up your board and board development, and also some on conflict resolution and accountability and some of these thorny things that we get into in governance. And then there are a couple of deep dives from the ICA group that really get into like, what's in your bylaws? Why do you need bylaws? Who decides what? You'll see some of the charts that we just had in there. And then the last tool I wanted to share is once you've looked at those extensiveness and significance tests, you can kind of grid these out. And for any common decisions that your co-op's making, once a year or more frequently, make a chart. It's not going to change that often. And then because you'll have things you only do once a year and you're like, ooh, right, how do we decide patronage? So it's nice to have a reference. And in this, you've got, what are the different roles within the co-op? Members, board, management. You might have work teams that you delegate some decision making to. And then what's the role in a given decision? So who's the decider? Who's required to be consulted to make a good decision? Who needs to be informed after the decision is made? And as Chris mentioned, who ratifies it? And this is not like 100% right for every co-op, but this is a pretty common layout. And Johan, will you just click one more time? Yeah. So you can see that the way I have this set up, to the left are things that are more governance and ownership decisions. So electing the board, members are going to do it. Board needs to be informed about the outcome. We're going to tell management because they're going to have a good working relationship with the board. Work teams don't need to. I mean, if there are members who are on the work teams, they will find out because they're members. But work teams are operational. They don't need to know. On the other extreme, stuff on the right is more management and operations. So determining individual pay raises, management's going to decide. They're going to consult with the folks doing the work. They might consult with the board, but probably the board has given them a general policy on, ranges and budget and stuff like that for raises. So really, management's going to decide. And again, this stuff's hard. Co-ops go back to their bylaws all the time. Having a chart will save you some work. I'm going to leave it here because we're at the end. Democratic process by itself doesn't guarantee competence. So on the one hand, you can be an awesome group of people and working together, but structureless, and that's going to eventually not go so great. On the other hand, you can have really awesome structures. You can have a board and bylaws, but it doesn't mean anything if your members aren't educated enough to participate in it. So those systems for onboarding, recruitment, sharing information regularly, training are all really critical. And Johan, if you want to skip the next two, then you can bring us home.
All right.
Because we're
Thank you. Thank you, Carolyn. We're going to leave a tool set as the second to last slide here for you guys. So you can go through these, see procedures, processes, and information sharing considerations. So you guys can check this out as homework. And just to invite you guys as we close, what is empowering, right? Consider that for your clients, right? Consider that for your customers, consider that for your members, consider that for your managers, the folks who are leading, even if you don't call them managers. Consider that for your directors, whether they're elders or youth. What is empowering about the structures you're setting up? How does it allow them to flow through and navigate hierarchy and structurelessness or structuredness? And how does it ultimately allow them to lead beyond the lid? So thank you guys for your time. If you guys have follow-up questions, you can check out our website. We've got playlists on YouTube of a lot of different webinars. We've got a monthly newsletter that you can subscribe to. We've got all the tools from this course set listed here on the Co-op tools. And you can just reach out if all of that fails. So with that, say thank you once again. Appreciate your time. We're here for you guys. Reach out anytime.
And I'll also say, for those of you who had like really nitty gritty, you're in the thick of dealing with governance stuff in your co-op. We know we just skimmed the surface, so feel free to reach out and just set up a call and we can go into more detail about your specific case. And thanks again to everybody who was vulnerable and shared your own situations and your own learning. Always really important and helpful.
All right. Stop the recording. If anyone has a follow-up, we'll take it offline. Is the recording stopped yet? No.